Creating and editing timelines. In this video, we'll learn how to create, edit, and delete timelines. A timeline has two pieces, a time span with a start and an end time, and a clock rate, which controls the rate at which historical time passes during that interval. We'll look at this in more detail later, but for now, let's look at why History in Motion has timelines. Since the start of this video, I've been playing the full scenario timeline for the draft riot scenario. That starts on Friday, July 10th, 1863 at 8 a.m. and ends on midnight of the evening of the 13th to 14th. As you can see, not much has been happening on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. When we get to 5 a.m. on Monday, you'll see that 95% of the action is crammed into the last 25% of the time duration. It makes more sense to move rapidly over the first 3 days and slow down on Monday. It actually also makes sense to divide up action-packed Monday into shorter durations. Timelines allow us to both divide up a period into smaller periods and to control the rate at which time passes in each one. Another reason for having timelines can be seen in this scenario covering a bit of the history of the town of Winnetka, Illinois. The main timeline, let me zoom out just a little bit here. The main timeline, full scenario, starts in 1832 and goes to 1936, over 100 years. If I start at the beginning and step through the events, it goes from 1832 to 36, to 1855 to 56, to 1860. So let me zoom out. I want to call your attention to this event in 1860. This is the voyage of the lake steamer Lady Elgin coming in from Milwaukee. She is actually going to sink, and that is a tragedy that I want to look at in some detail. However, in this full scenario timeline, this is the only event of that mini scenario which shows up. So let me switch to the timeline Lady Elgin sinking. That starts at midnight on Friday, September 7th, 1860. At 1 a.m., here's the event that we saw in the full scenario timeline, the trip down to Chicago. At 11 p.m., the Lady Elgin takes off from Chicago on the return voyage. Let me zoom in on that a little bit more. 3.5 hours later, the Lady Elgin is struck by another ship, the Augusta, which continues on back to Chicago. Here's the event, which is the sinking. And there is this area event representing the gradual spread of the Lady Elgin debris when it washes ashore at Winnetka. And then at 8 a.m., some students from nearby Northwestern University come and help save lives in the surf there. Now, none of these events, except that first one, the trip down from Milwaukee, showed up in the main timeline. The reason is that full scenario covers 104 years, whereas the Lady Elgin events take up all of a day and a half. From a time perspective, the full scenario timeline is too coarse-grained to show details at that fine a level. Most of them got skipped right over. By creating a timeline for a shorter time duration, we are able to show the events of the Lady Elgin tragedy in detail. I want to point out something else. Notice that in this timeline, the times are shown with the time of day, the day of the week, and the month, day, and year. Whereas in the full scenario timeline, covering a century, the times are only shown as years. This will be covered in the video on time formatting, but I want to call your attention to it now. So this is why we have timelines in History in Motion, to deal with time granularity and to break time up into smaller, shorter durations and to control the rate at which historical time flows. Let's go back to the draft riot scenario and look at how we actually create a timeline. Now, to create a timeline, we can use New Timeline, or we can open the toolbar and click on the Create Timeline button. So let's call this Draft Riots Monday. always leave this checkbox enabled. And let's make the start time Monday at 5 a.m. and the end time is Tuesday at midnight. And let's set the clock rate to be 2 hours, and we can choose anything from seconds up to millennia. 2 hours in 20 wall clock seconds. You can only have seconds or minutes. Now, I express it this way just to show that it doesn't have to be, for example, 1 hour in 10 seconds or 1 day in 1 minute. So let's save it, get the confirmation. Let's select it up here. And let's zoom in a little bit. Okay. Now I'm going to start the timeline playing and count out how many wall clock seconds are passing. So it's 5 a.m. So we start it. So 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005, 1006, 1007, 1008, 1009, 1010, 1011. So roughly 1 hour in 10 seconds or 2 hours in 20 seconds. So let's edit that timeline again and speed it up. So when we edit it, the timeline stops. We edit it, set the clock rate to 2 hours in 10 seconds, twice as fast. Save it. Okay, gets reset to the start. And now let's play it again. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005, 1000. There we go. So 1 hour and 5 seconds, roughly twice as fast. To delete the timeline, again, we do edit timeline. And we can choose which timeline to edit. It always picks the current one. Let's delete it, get the confirmation. So we delete it. And the timeline is set to full scenario. A word about full scenario. Let's take a look at that. Full scenario is under the control of History in Motion. You can't edit it at all. You can't change the name or anything else about it. The start date is always the earliest start time of the earliest event. The end time is always the end time of the latest event, in this case, Tuesday at midnight. And the clock rate is such that the entire timeline will pass in 1 wall clock minute. So as you edit events, as you create and delete them, History in Motion is always comparing those to full scenario and seeing if that needs to be adjusted. That concludes our discussion of timelines. For more information on how to change the time display on a per timeline basis, see the video on time formatting.